talked about how to get started with the Polo server, but we were not able to start the Polo server yet because we need something called schema. There were two things. One is called resolver types, and if you remember, the other one which we had was called resolvers. Now, to handle this, let's get start with the first thing, that is the type def. So before we jump into type def, we have to know what basically a schema is. So in GraphQL, the main thing which we have seen right now, let's say you have a list of books, and let's say you want to fetch only one book, that is this one, and after that, from that book, what you want is to get a author of that book, and from those authors you want to get the reviews of the author, or it can be a book incoming example. So to define all the schema for this, we need to define the types of individual data source. So in this, it is books, author, and review. Now what we do is, let's talk about them in brief. So a schema which you see is something like this, which contains type, which defines the data type, and then it defines what data we have. So it has a title, and then we have an author, and similarly with the author we have name, author name, and then we have the author books, which is nothing but a list of books. So whenever you want to define a list of books, you have to divide it into an array. Okay, now see, let's see the another thing here is, now the schema which you define supports all these five uh, scalar type. So it can be int, it can be float, it can be a string, it can be a boolean, and it can be an id itself. So id is basically it's by default it is a unique identifier which is provided by Polo itself, but it's which is basically a type of string usually. But yeah, as it says, its id is not intended to be human readable. Okay, so now let's say if you want to define a unique identifier, you can use ID for that case. Okay, now once we have defined a schema, then let's talk about few more other things here. So there is another topic which I want to touch here is called nullability. So by default, all the data types which you define here, the title, author, even if it comes null, you don't it doesn't throw error. But let's say you want to throw error, and you want to do a strict check that okay, if anything of them comes null, you have to throw error. So to do that, you can do directly by just appending this exclamation here, and automatically, like if the name comes empty, it will throw error. But what if you want to do an availability check inside this list of books? To do that, you can just add this exclamation inside this array itself. So what it now, it will do two checks. So the first which you see here, it will do the check whether the books array is not empty, and the second check it will do is it will check whether the books which we have is doesn't contain any nullable book inside it. So this is all about the schema which I wanted to talk about. Now what we do is, now let's go back to our code itself. So here we wanted to define the type defs, right? So before we get started with the type def, what you need to do is go back to your extensions and make sure you install the GraphQL syntax highlighting from GraphQL Foundation. Okay, all right. So once we have done with this, now what we do is, before we jump into the db.json, which I've created just for the temporary purpose, what you can do is you can just go ahead and create schema, which you see here, just like how we have created schema.graphql. Automatically, my VS Code finds out that this is a schema here, which we have. Now here, one more thing is the extension which we installed here, right? You have to automatically provide a template to it. So the template, you can define it with the with this like inside this. So if you are using a GraphQL, or if like, so you have to define it like this. Validation checks. So the ID which you see here is, it's automatically generated as I said. Similarly, the strings, and here what we have defined is the platform string. The platform which we have for the game can contain array of array of platforms, but it should not be nullable. And same, the whole platform value should not be nullable. So this is what we mean. So we have created some type def here. Okay. And the main thing which we need to see here is you have to always make sure that you create a query. So this query is very important in every schema. So before, without that, it's incomplete. So after you have defined all your schema, which we have discussed, the next thing is the type query, and here you have to define what exactly your games will be. So games will be the list of games, reviews will be a list of reviews, and authors will be a list of authors. Now, one more thing here before you start anything or any types in your schema, you have to make sure you have to always write in the tilde. Yeah, and then you have to write this. Then only you have to write the type of it. Okay. So once we have defined the types, now what we do is let's uncomment it and make sure you have exported the types so we can import it. So let's try to import it. But here one thing you might see that why we have used .js but it should be GraphQL, right? So just to make sure in this example in Apollo we need it to be schema.js. Alright. So once we have done this, now it's automatically imported. See, now if we try to hover over it, we have all the type defs. So in the next video we are going to talk about resolvers.